went out to fight in Spain, and we were just very proud of him, you know. We was all a lot younger, of course, but and then he also made a name for himself, been in trade union all his life, always fought for the underdog, and it was just a pity that he passed away when he was being honoured, really, because he was given the freeman of the town, you know.
There was no sham, there was no or anything about him. Everything was true. Everything he said was true.
Then there was the question of recruitment for the brigade. And a lot of lads from Sheffield went, you know, quite a lot. And when you think, those lads who volunteered like that, there's no prospects whatever of even getting payment for themselves. It was a long time before we were able nationally to make some sort of separation allowance, so that the families must have been behind them to let them go, and they themselves would be destitute. And they were for a time. Now, later on, we got the national movement, and certainly some monies were supplied, and a little separation allowance has come, but it wasn't until later.
My husband, Joe Albert, who was the son of a Spanish family who had settled in Sheffield, he used to listen to broadcasts in Spanish given by La Pasionaria, the leader, the woman's leader in Spain. I don't know what her exact position was. And of course, he understood them because the family spoke Spanish at home, and he understood Spanish. And that really got him going, and he decided that the one thing that he wanted to do more than anything was to go and fight in Spain. He had to break the news to his family. His father kept a sweets and tobacco and general shop, and Joe helped him to run it. And it was quite a blow when he told them, his family, that he wanted to go to Spain. But I think they understood the reason why. And he made his arrangements, and he left Sheffield at midnight, about a week before Christmas in December 1936, and just more or less disappeared into, into the blue. I mean, I had no idea where he was or how far he'd got, and I never had any word of him for about 3 months after he'd been in active in battle.
I suppose it was the logical thing to do because of my background, come from a mining family, gone through the 21, 26 strike, and all the activity leading up to it. The campaigns were on around releasing Tailman in Germany, who was in a concentration camp, and so on. It was a logical progression, as it were,
I was at a meeting at the Foresters' Hall in Trippett Lane. I think it was beginning the first week in February. And it was a packed meeting. I don't know who the speaker was, but somebody came down the side of the hall and beckoned me to come out, and I went out, and outside this person gave me a piece of paper with a phone number on, and they said, "Will you go and ring this number? It's something connected with you." Well, I went outside, and it was a dark winter's night, and I found a phone box. It's still there, by the way. And I went inside, and my hands were absolutely trembling. And I managed to make out this phone number, and I rang. And somebody said, the other end said, there's been a very great battle in Spain at Jarama, and there's been a lot of casualties, but that's all we know. Well, I'll never forget that moment. You know, I just sort of felt like a jelly. But we heard no more after that. And then about the last week in February, I got a letter. It was just simply a short letter, and it said that I'd been in the battle, but it didn't mention a name, and I mean, it said he'd been on active service, and it just said that he was now stationed at Albacete, and he gave me an address, and he said it would be all right for me to write. Well, of course, I was absolutely over the moon then. And from that time onwards, letters came regularly, at least once a week, and sometimes more often. And also, he sent me postcards, which Bill's given me some, and I've got some others, propaganda postcards. And I think somehow, whether it was done on compassionate grounds, I don't know. But by the July of 1937, I had word that Joe was coming back to England, and which he did in July of that year.
It was, you know, a feeling of, I don't know, depression, I think, to a certain extent. And of course then things weren't too easy, you know. Quite a lot of unemployment in the west of Scotland at that time, and being in Spain at that time wasn't the best recommendation, so this was why I floated down to Yorkshire. From Yorkshire by marriage, you see. So.
But when they came back, quite a lot of them lads for years and years, there's no prospects, there's no employment. So it was a real sacrifice that they made, a thing that we've forgotten, or we've been allowed to forget it. We shouldn't be, because their lads made the first onslaught, not just on Franco, but as I said, on Hitler Germany. It was the first start. If they hadn't have started that, perhaps some of the elements in this country at that time, instead of fighting, as Churchill said, in the last ditch and so forth in the streets and whatnot, they'd have been fighting on Eastern Front against Russia. Because there was always a chance, wasn't there, Bill, at that time, that there was a swing over to supporting Hitler, not opposing him. And I think that the influence that this had in the Franco business actually did help in public interest in it, knowledgeable interest, not the propaganda that were put out through press, which was as bad then as it is today.
Well, before I went to Spain, for 2 or 3 or 4 years, maybe more, I was in the Young Communist League. And I'd studied socialist pamphlets and books and so on, and I was very conscious of what was happening at the time. And the dangers of fascism. Hitler seemed to be invincible, he was sweeping across Europe, and this government here was pursuing a policy of appeasement. They were signing, instead of fighting him, they were signing agreements, naval agreements and so on and so forth. And to me, it was a very, very dangerous time, very dangerous situation. I was conscious of it. And of course, being a Jew as well, which made me more angry about it, because there was things were circulating that they're murdering Jews and all the rest of it. And I realised that something had to be done about it. I mean, and my parents are Jewish, and I've got a lot of friends that are Jewish, and I thought to myself, what would happen if they came into this country? They'd exterminate all the Jews. And that when the war broke out, I was, in a way, I was elated, because I thought, here's a chance now planted Hitler and the fascists right between the eyes. And I had some friends as well that were also like mind, and one of them was Walt Dobson, a nice bloke. And got in touch with him, and we met, and we're talking about it. So I said, listen, this is the way we feel we ought to be in Spain, you know, fighting the Nazis. He says, well, he says, how do you get there? I said, I'll tell you, because I was working at the time and he was free. I said, go to the party office and find out how you can get there. So he went to the party office and they told him how to do it. And there were two others, there was Joe Maister and there was George Stockdale. We went together. It was at the end of 1987. No, 1967. 1937, mine was 1937. And we all got together and decided to try and get into Spain. Well, we got in touch with the office and they told us what we should do. And before you can say 1, 2, 3, we were told that this was a Wednesday. I'm going into detail now. And we should get ready because on Thursday night, the party that's going to Spain were leaving Leeds. I didn't tell my parents because I did the same as what his brother did. Phil Ellis didn't tell them because, you know, they're very sentimental and all the rest of it. And this Walt Dobson called to our house about 6 o'clock on the Thursday, and I was told not to take any heavy baggage, you know, just tiny little things that they needed, underwear and so on, and that's what I did. And we all met at Mr. Wagenheim's house. His wife and Mr. Wagenheim organised a little farewell party. And there was Nat Klein there, Jimmy Roach, I think, Ron Mendelsohn, and I can't remember them all. And they talked it over and everything, and it was quite a happy evening. And then we left and we went down to London.
Well, we used to have all these people coming to our house the night before Phil Ellis went away. It was at our house the night before, as the groups went away. See, our house was, as I said, was the ever-open door, and no matter what was going on, they dropped in. We used to have a regular person called Rawlings, I'll give you his name, and my mother-in-law used to call him the Malchamovis. In Yiddish, it means the person who takes people away and you don't see them anymore. That's a kind. It wasn't the call of a devil. It was something like that. And this Rawlings used to come along, and the people who were going to Spain usually were brought to our house, and he used to kind of weigh them up to see that they weren't adventurers, that they were proper interested people who were doing this for their beliefs, not just ordinary adventurers. Mind you, 1 or 2 adventurers got through, and that's how it was.
Went to see Peter Kerrigan. He told us what to do. Get a weekend ticket to Paris. Go to Victoria Station, through Victoria Station into Paris on boat train, and they will meet some other comrades, and they'll give us further instructions. And this is exactly what we did. Went to Paris for the weekend. We got a weekend ticket. It was only 30 shillings at the time, very cheap. And on the way to France, there were 2 secret British agents, you know, they were on the boat, and nobody knew I was going. Nobody, not a soul. Apart from the local branch of the Communist Party and these 4 lads that were. These 3 other lads that was with me, and these 2 special branch men, they came up to me and they says, "Ooh, we know you are, we know where you're going, you better go back, you'll get yourself into trouble." And this is, "Well, where are you going?" I said, I've got to visit an aunt in in Paris. And then they went away. And we managed to get to Paris all right. There were certain things we had to follow. We had to go as a group. We had to go as individuals. And when we got out the train, it's all right, we could join as a group. And I went under an assumed name, actually, because I never took any evidence of actually who I was, which was a mistake. So I had to go under an assumed name. Peter Kerrigan gave me an old somebody's insurance card with a special name. I had to memorise it, remember the number and all that. Anyhow, I got through to Paris all right, and we made our way to a hotel, not much of a place. It wasn't a luxury hotel. And from there, we had something to eat there, plenty of wine, knocking to drink and all that. And then we went to some trade union centre in Paris. I couldn't tell you where it was. We took a taxi, and nobody knew where. Actually, we knew the address to go to. Took a taxi. We told the driver to the address, and he took us there. Huge building. You see, it was chock-a-block with people. I don't know where. And there we got an examination, a medical examination. And okay, you're all right. You can go. You're good enough to stop a bullet. And then we got instructions to go by train to Alais. Have you heard of Alais in Paris? A couple of 100 miles away from the Pyrenees. And we got instructions. We were there a few days in a nice guest house. Then we got instructions to be at a certain spot at 2 o'clock. I think it was on a Wednesday afternoon. And whilst I was there, I passed a nice shop, a grocer's shop, with all sorts of fruit and things, you know. And I bought 2 packets of beautiful raisins, 2 packets of dates. I put them in my bag. And because I didn't know what was going to happen, you know, I thought, well, it'll help to give me, could fill me tummy while I'm on the road. So, and the coaches were there right on the second. There was not, I say coaches because there wasn't one coach. There were about 4 or 5 coaches, and they were all full of volunteers, but they weren't all British. One coach had British volunteers, another one had German, French, Italian, and they all made their way to the foothills of the Pyrenees. And it was getting dark at the time, because it was winter time. And 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it was dark. I must have got there about 7 o'clock. And I remember we got out the bus and got together, and they took them in groups into a sort of a bungalow and for a meal. Well, the food for me was atrocious. Fishing, I don't know, with olive oil, and a good thing I bought those raisins and those dates. They kept me going. After they all had the meal, they got us all together, and they marched us to a little piece of flat ground surrounded by the Pyrenees, and it was dark then. It wasn't a bright night. It was been cloudy because you could hardly see the stars. Very dark night. And then we were gathered there, and somebody gave us some more instructions that we're going to cross the Pyrenees. We mustn't say much at all. Very quiet, be as quiet as possible. No cigarettes, no matches to be struck. And they gave us special shoes. They call them alpargatas in Spain. They're made of rushes and straw. And then for the first time I saw a Spaniard. He was to be our guide. He had a revolver in the holster, you know, and a rifle on his shoulder. And we set off. And we climbed those mountains. I never thought we'd see the end of it, get to the top at all. Up, and fortunately, I was a good walker because I'd been in a rambling club for years in Leeds, in League of Youth Rambling Club, and it was nothing to walk 20 or 30 miles on a Sunday. So I was used to walking, and I was very, fit at the time. Anyhow, it must have been about 6, 7 in the morning before we reached the top of the Pyrenees. So we'd been walking nearly 10 hours on the Pyrenees. No food. I was chewing the raisins and dates, you see. And I gave one away to somebody. I don't know who it was. An American, I think it was. He was starving. So I gave one away. And but we were exhausted by the time we got to the top. We had to walk another half a mile onto a road. And the old sand, brown sand, We walked onto the road, and there were some coaches there, and they took us to took us to Figueres, the fortress town of Figueres. And we got off the trucks into the barracks. Huge barracks. Walls were about 4 feet thick. And the marches into a lovely hall in the barracks. And there were tables, and the tablecloths, and there were glasses with sherry, or was it cognac, inside the glasses. And the commander came in to give us a little, welcoming us and praising us and all the rest of it. And just as he was talking, there was an air raid. And you could hear bombs dropping not far away. They must have had their spies, the Fifth Column, they knew everything that was going on practically. And it didn't tend to do any real damage because it was such a well-built place. But they all made a dive under the table. Anyway, gave us a nice welcome and shown us round, and we were there a week. And in that week we did a bit of marching, on the parade ground, and lectures, talks, one thing or another. You couldn't go anywhere, there's nothing to buy. But the place was absolutely empty of any consumer goods, anything like that. There's a room around, there's some bars of chocolate somewhere sold. They all made, it was a tale of, there's nothing there at all. And we then got instructions that the following day, after being there a week, we were moving down south to Albacete, the training base for the British battalion. And that's what happened. I don't know how long it took, but it took a hell of a long time, a day and a half or 2, I don't know how long it took. But on the road, during the day, when we passed these towns, there were crowds outside each station, cheering us, welcoming, and throwing oranges inside the truck, inside the train, and bottles of wine as well. And if you had any cigarettes or anything like that, we used to give them to the people that were hanging around. And that's what went on all along the journey. And we managed to get to Albacete. It was early in the morning. We got there early one morning. And we marched us into a barracks, Karl Marx barracks, if you please. They renamed all the barracks. And we were there, went there, and sat down at one end of the barracks. Huge place it is. Stone-built barracks, and in the centre, of course, it was surrounded. In the middle of the barracks, there was a courtyard, and this is where we were waiting there, and eventually they come and they took photographs of us, and they gave us some uniforms. Finally, we paraded, ready to go. And you would put the uniforms on. Well, you never seen such a sight in all your life. It was clothing that they'd captured from the Italians. There'd been a battle in Guadalajara or something, and they'd defeated the Italians, and they'd left a lot of war material and clothing. This is what we got. It was a cloak. I got a cloak, a long cloak, but it was thick, warm material, and a huge hood about 3 feet long. And here it was, we were paraded, and we had these things on. Talk about laugh, I've never laughed so much in all my life. All of them, they'd just come out of civil, you know, the clothes, jackets and sports jackets and the trousers, whatever it was, and suddenly they had to discard all those and put this uniform on. And just the sight of anybody in that uniform would have terrified anybody. Well, eventually we got to Tarazona, the training base, and it was very late, 12 o'clock, it must be at 12 o'clock at night, and they got us in front of the hut. There were a few huts there, in front of the huts, and they knew we were tired because we'd been travelling all that time, right from Figueras. And so they straight away, they divided us up into groups, and each group went into a different hut. I can't remember whether there were beds there or just thick padding, what do they call them? There's a name for it now, it's slipped my mind. And we went to, they left us alone then, nothing to eat, just left us alone and went to sleep. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, something around about that time, we heard bugles going. And then a big sergeant came into the hut and he said, "Wakey, wakey, rise and shine." Alive. You're not with your mothers now, you know. And we had to get dressed. Well, we got dressed quickly and get your towels, bit of soap if you've got any. We had to run about half a mile to the other side. It was icy cold as well. It was still winter. And that's where we had a wash. And then we had to run back, or get back as quick as possible. And then we had a meal, you see. And then we marched to the square. There's a square about half a mile away. And we did some marching there, you know, left, right, about, turn, get on your head, stand on your feet. And they give us the directions in Spanish. So everybody was different ways, you see, until they got the hang of the words, you know, what they meant. And all the way back from the barracks to the hut, and we had to go through the centre of the town. We were singing these revolutionary songs all together. And the people were cheering us, welcoming us, praising us. Salute, comrade, you know, all that. And more or less, this is what happened. Well, we had lectures as well. They had an old machine gun. Where they got it from, I don't know. An old one. They took it apart, showed us where, you know, how to fit it together, and any faults, certain faults that regularly happen with machine guns, how to put them right. But there's certain faults that take place that you can't put right. You've got to take it back, send it back to the mechanics. And then we had lectures on the situation, political, economic, you know. And then we had language sessions as well. And after 2 or 3 weeks of that, we only had wooden guns, a piece of wood shaped like guns. They weren't guns at all, but we did everything with those that you do with guns except fire. And after about 3 weeks, they gave us some real rifles for rifle target practice. And we did that a couple of times, 2 or 3 shots each time. We were told how to aim, how to fire, you know, how to press your finger, where to put the rifle on your shoulder and so. And there were old Russian rifles that were about 6 foot long. You could hardly reach. You had to be 6 foot with long arms to reach the trigger. Then rumours started flying about that there'd been a breakthrough and the battalion was retreating and the situation at the front was very, very serious. That's something, you know. And it turned out, these rumours turned out to be true, because that night, about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, each one was called into the office separately, and I can only speak for I went in the office and they called me in and they asked me if told me about the serious situation, and I had the choice. I could go or I could stay where I was. I says, well, I've come for one purpose, and that is to fight fascism. Okay, right, that was it. And I suppose all of them said the same thing, because actually that's what they'd come for. And unfortunately we're having to go earlier than expected. We were supposed to be there 6 weeks at least, and it was only 3 weeks. At the station there were thousands of people there, and some women were in tears, crying their eyes out, because they knew what it was all about, you see. You might see men go on the train to the front and knew that they'd never come back again. And some of them had sons of their own that had been in the front, at the front, and it was very sentimental time for everybody concerned. Anyway, we got onto the trains, and this was the beginning. Eventually got off the trains. We got onto some trucks then. I think we got onto some trucks, and we were supposed to be going to the front line. Well, we travelled 2 or 3 nights like that because nobody seemed to know where the front line was. I couldn't understand it at all. I don't care, we hadn't been issued with rifles yet. And we were packed like sardines in these trucks, and talk about torture. Someone was sat on my knees, somebody sat on my legs. I was crushed between two. I couldn't get my legs, free my legs from, there was such pressure on them, so tight together. Like. So we got off the trucks, we walked a few miles, another few miles. Eventually we caught up with the battalion, those that had been there before us. And you've never seen such a haggard lot in all your life. They were tired, worn out, their beards, their trousers were torn. Never seen such a haggard-looking, downtrodden looking bunch of fellas and all that been on the retreat for weeks. Bombed, strafed, and they had no respite at all. Eventually, there was a few stragglers as well because we're on the retreat, and some of them had lost touch with each other. Eventually, we got together. I think it was in a place called Gandesa, and we were waiting for all the stragglers and whatnot, you know, to join together to form the battalion. And they did. After a week or so, Gandesa is a lovely place. I liked it. After a week or so, they'd managed to collect all these stragglers and whatnot, and we all joined together and reformed the British battalion. And this is where we met Gregory. And Gregory was put in charge of 4 of us. And we got instructions, you see, to go to a certain, I don't know where it was, I can't tell you the actual place. I know it was at the bottom of a hill, right, long hill. And there was a building nearby, and the officer in charge, and it was supposed to collect rifles that were in this building. We hadn't got no rifles yet. And we waited and waited. It must have been an hour or 2 before it made his appearance. And he says, right, lads, come on. And he took us into this building, and we're all equipped these Russian rifles, long-range rifles. And we got the rifles, and then we were issued with a tin of jam, the 4 of us, a tin of jam, and a couple of loaves of bread. And that's it, as far as I can remember. I think there was a couple of tins of corned beef as well. I did corned beef. This was our rations for the 4 of us. then we marched up the hill in groups of 5, because this was the tactics that they used. They all bunched together in little groups of 5, and with a nice little distance separating each 5. And the 4 of us with Gregory, we walked up this hill until we got to the ridge of the hill. As soon as we got to the ridge of the hill, we could hear the ping of bullets flying about all over the show. But there was the fight from some distance away, because by the time they got where we were, they nearly spent. So when we got to the top of the ridge, we saw soldiers coming towards us, you see, but they weren't fascists. They were Poles that were retreating. So we dug little trenches in front of us and made a little pile of mud, whatever it could. And the terrain there was very hard to dig. It was all stony, you know. And we never had we did it with our bayonets. Carved a hole in the ground, and with our hands we made a little mound in front of us. And we used that, you see, to rest our rifles and aim. And we waited there, and suddenly we were at the side of a road, right at the side of a road. And suddenly somebody shouted, "Oh, they're coming, they're coming!" There's a few motor truckloads of soldiers, and men on them were waving their rifles, "Arriba España!" So then they started firing. But after a few minutes, somebody shouted, "We've got one of the bloody swines, we've got one of them," and they're cheering, oh, they're going mad. But before he could say 1, 2, 3, they were back of us, they were behind us. So Gregory says, "Well, we better move back as fast as we can, otherwise they'll surround us and we'll be taken prisoner." And I was dressed with puttees, you know, puttees, these things that you put, like bandages you put round your legs, and the trousers ends round your knee, and your bandage on your head, round your leg. So, you know, they had to move quickly, no messing about. But we were in a vine vineyard. We call them vineyards, with the vines were hard. Have you noticed that? You know what a vine is? They're very hard and they're prickly. And we were racing through one of those, and one of my puttees come undone. And I were catching him. So I had to hesitate a minute. It didn't take me a minute to wrap this puttee around my leg. And when I got up, they'd all disappeared. I couldn't see any sign of them. But I knew the direction in which they'd gone. So I moved in that direction. And I couldn't catch up with them for no money. No money could I was in the wilderness on my own there. Eventually I caught up with a Canadian. I met him before. Nice beard, nice looking lad. Very pleasant. And I told him what had happened. I said, "Have you seen the British battalion?" He says, "No." He said, "I didn't see anybody." He was a map maker. He used to make maps of the terrain for headquarters, so that they knew exactly what was what, you see, where to defend, where not to defend, where the best positions are. He says, "But I'm going down that way." I says, "I'll come with you." So he came with me, and after a while we saw some heads bobbing up and down, you know, in the rushes. I said, "Oh, that must be them." So we got to them, and it was a Spanish battalion. It wasn't British. Where they disappeared to, I don't know. And then we caught up with a Scotch lad, and he was in the same predicament as we were. He'd lost touch with the battalion, the company. And so anyhow, it was getting dark then, and you had to get across the Ebro River. And when I got to the bridge to cross the Ebro River, I saw something, you know, that I suppose others have seen it in similar circumstances. The road was chock-a-block for miles, miles and miles, with peasants carrying children and parcels, mules, and there was cavalry there, here and there, guiding them. Anyhow, we managed to cross the river, and when I got across the river, it was pandemonium there. Nobody knew what's what, and there was these three of us. Anyway, through making inquiries, we found out the British Food Kitchen, which was a lorry, that's all, the kitchen, mobile kitchen, was up the road, and if you go there, they'll tell you what's what. So I went up to the food kitchen, got hold of the blokes, and we asked them where the British, they'd seen the British company, battalion, and so they said, well, we're waiting for them. There's all this food here. It's going to waste, and we don't know where the hell they are. So we had a little chat between us, and we decided to hang on till the morning. Couldn't wait for night, you see. The three of us, this Scotch lad and this Canadian and myself, we went to sleep in this barn, built of stone, and I don't know, it must have been fast asleep for some time, and suddenly we were awakened by terrific noise. And another one. I realised they were shelling the area. So it was pitch black. You couldn't see a thing. So I shouted for this jock, and this Canadian. I said, "Hey, better get out of here. They're shelling the area. They might have been safe in there." Anyhow, couldn't get any answer from them. I thought, they'd gone out, they'd gone away without me, you see. So I shouted, I didn't want to leave them there. And so eventually I got hold of the Canadian. And I said, well, where's Jock? He said, I don't know where Jock is. He said, well, I said, I've been shouting for 10 minutes now in all the all of the barn and all round. I said, and there's no answer at all. And the shells were coming thick and fast. It was a heavy artillery shells. And I says, well, we'd better get to the kitchen again and see what's happening. Then the morning came round, and it seems that Sam Weil, the company commander, had heard about what was going on. There'd been a breakthrough, and he'd come back in a hurry, and we met him in the morning. And he collected all the ones that were there, and he managed to get hold of a truck. He says, we're going back across the Ebro to try and find out where the battalion is. And says, okay. Had something to eat, the truck there was plenty of food. And we got on the truck, rifles and the ammunition and everything, and we crossed the river. It was a very, very fearless man, was Sam Weil. Well, it was a very courageous man altogether. Went into it, and the truck went through the areas that we'd been to, and couldn't see anybody or anything. Anyhow, it eventually picked a spot, and he says, now you two stay here, stand guard here, and watch for anything that comes across that seems likely to be danger. So we went, and then we went a bit further on, and then he picked on me and another bloke. He said, you stand there, you guard this spot, you see, and keep alert, he says. And we'll keep in touch with you. We'll come back and we'll get in touch with you. So, and that's the last I saw of him. And we waited there. We must have been there a day and a half. They never got in touch with us. Never went to us at all. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't do nothing. So we decided that one of us should go back and find out what was going on. And it seems that the battalion had got together and settled in a place just before the Ebro River, just before the bridge. And they had orders to hold the fascists until all the peasants and everybody else had crossed the bridge and got out of the area, you see. And they'd fought a ding-dong battle with the fascists. Terrific little battle it was. And they held the fascists back until got the all clear and then at night they'd cross the bridge themselves. And and this is what we were told, you see. This is what this bloke was told when we sent him back to find out what was going on. And he came back and told us, he says, well, he says, the best thing we can do now is to go back, because nobody will get in touch with us, nobody's here at all. So we got together and we all went back across the bridge and joined the battalion again. And that was our line of defence, the Ebro River. And all action ceased then for a long time. No action took place. The only thing we had to do was dig a trench right on our side, at the front of the, before the river, in front of the river. And every night we went with pick and shovel, and we dug a trench right as far as the eye could see, right in front of the river. We got back to some base in Gandesa, and we started retraining again. New rifles and lectures and practice with the rifles, practice with machine guns, and learnt new tactics of warfare and what to do and what not to do. And this went on for a couple of months. And the fascists never crossed the river for all that time. And then it seems that the fascists were attacking the front in around Madrid somewhere. And it's becoming very serious. And it seems they decided to organise an offensive across the Ebro River. And then there was a lot of excitement then. They seemed to be getting war material, a bit of war material, a few planes, and a bit of artillery that they never had before. And they were sending men across the river to see the lay of the land, where the fascists were, where they weren't, and so on. And eventually they started the offensive, the Ebro offensive. They built pontoon bridges across the river and ordinary other kinds of bridges to get the war material across. And the offensive, I was with the British battalion at the time, and we got quite a distance inland. We captured a place called Tavera, which is the other side of the Ebro, and we got to I think Gandesa must have been before, further on. Can't remember the details, you see. Anyhow, we kept going, and lost a lot of men at the time because they were in the firing line, you see. They defended the best way they could. I don't know whether it was a surprise or not, but it seemed to be a surprise, this offensive. They were caught unawares. And we got to a spot called in front, the foothills of a hill. In the meantime, this was a few days after the offensive had been going on. And by that time, they'd sent reinforcements to defend the area. Planes, artillery, everything you can think of. Reinforcement, and they were defending this hill. And we tried to, and this hill was the approach, I think, to Gandesa, that's right. So Gandesa must have been the other side of the Ebro River. And we fought bloody bitterly. We lost a lot of men on trying to capture that hill. They had it highly fortified with machine guns, mortars, riflemen, small hut, everything you can think of they had in front of that hill. And there were loads of men killed and wounded. The thing is this, you see, it was hard to get them to the hospitals. They had to move them into, they had to shift the wounded by mule. They had these like chairs or stretchers two on either side of a mule, and they dressed the wounded on each side, and they had someone guiding the mules, and it was pitiful to see. They were dying, and they couldn't do anything about it, bleeding to death, and they needed immediate attention to save them. Couldn't save them at all, and they couldn't, and the casualties were so great that they had to relieve some of us to carry the people that were wounded to the crossroads where the ambulances were waiting. And sometimes you couldn't get across because the shell fire was so heavy. And I've seen doctors crying there, you know, bitterly, because they couldn't save the men, and you could see the men bleeding to dying and didn't have anything to do to save them with. You see, the only way to save them was getting to hospital right away, and the ambulances could hardly get across. And it was a terrible thing, was that terrible. And at night, you know, you could hear the moans and groans of the wounded. And we tried over and over again to capture that hill. There was no chance of taking it at all. It was just, and eventually they started a counter-offensive, and we had to move back. And we defended it with everything we had. And they brought more and more war material. I was telling you, it was difficult to keep alive. I remember being on a hillside, and there was you had to go into the valley to the river for water, and there was a load of crisscross paths to get to it, and I didn't know the right path. You see, it was my turn to get the water, and I managed to get on the wrong path, and I was in the just at the point where all the fire, you know, the crossfire was taking place right in the middle of it. They were dropping all over me. Shells, trench mortars also. And some of them, mind you, I was lucky, some of them didn't explode. It was a very, very difficult time. And the bravery of the courage of the men is indescribable. Couldn't describe it. They didn't care whether they died. So you see, you've got when you're in the firing line like that, you've got to keep down flat, if possible. And some of them just stood up, and no sooner stood up a yard for a second, and they'd had it, because they were facing trained veteran troops, Moroccans, Italians, and Germans. And Spaniards as well. They could play a Beethoven symphony with the artillery and the machine guns. And the artillery. It was German artillery. And it was like a Beethoven symphony. Jum, jum, all focused on the crossroads there. And how you survived is nobody's business. And later, and then, of course, the weather at the time wasn't suitable for planes. But then the weather cleared, and then the planes started coming over. You couldn't. It's sandy ground. You see, when they dropped a bomb, it threw a sea of sand, and you couldn't see where you were. What you thought they were on top of you altogether. And I remember crossing the river, the centre with our material, you know, trying to get across the river. And one plane came over, spotted us, and machine gun was, and what do they call it? They went up and down the area. You see, until all his ammunition had gone, and we couldn't move. We couldn't move. We didn't move. You see, because we thought as far as we could know, if we kept down, no target. You couldn't see the target. They were hidden. You see, couldn't move. It kept us for about half an hour. We couldn't move. That just shows you what air superiority is. It can stop a whole unit, you see, and that was, to me, that was vital. Air supremacy. It's what won them the war, I think. Yes, but yeah, there's no question about it. They were superior trained. They had superior equipment. But whilst this fighting was taking place on the Ebro, here, whilst this fighting was taking place, negotiations were taking place through the League of Nations to get all volunteers out of Spain. And they'd already reached an agreement that at a certain date all volunteers should be sent out of Spain. Well, we were withdrawn, eventually we were withdrawn. And I don't know where it was, but it was some little town. And whilst we were there, a committee from the League of Nations came to interview us individually, and they asked us all sorts of questions such as, are you sorry you came here? Would you do it again? And what did you do it for? And so on and so forth, you see. And that was it. And eventually, we managed to organise a train for us to go to get into France. And we went to a place called Jean Duluth. And we got off, we landed in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, and we got off there. We're waiting for another train to take us in through Paris onto the coast and then to London. And but when we got to Jean-de-Luz, they made us a meal there. And it was heavenly. The meal was heavenly. Had wonderful food, roast potatoes, and what do they call those eggs? Tortolas or something. What do they call them? And it was excellent food, and French bread as well, which was excellent. The first meal we've had, a decent meal I had since the went to Spain. Then we caught a train, and we were visited by the Salvation Army on the train, which we didn't have much to do with. And then right through, they never stopped in Paris, right to the coast, onto a boat, into what they call it, that port on the coast, Dover, and caught a train there to London. And we were met in London by a huge crowd. They seemed to know exactly when we were arriving. Huge crowd cheered us, and we marched right to the court building. They had a huge court building, a lovely restaurant there. And all the people of any note at all were there. And they all made speeches, and they took a television picture of it, and I was in that television picture. And just a glance, just starting to cut the edge of the picture. But I didn't see it, but somebody told me that I was in it, and they knew me, so I take it for granted that I was in the picture. And then we went into a room, and we were given instructions, you see. We weren't to go home that day. Got to go the following day, and they gave us tickets to catch a certain train. I wanted to go home quietly and finish with, you see, this huge crowd outside waiting. And I think there's only me. That's all that was going to leave. And they got hold of me, shoulder high, and they marched me right through the town. To the court buildings as well, the cafe and the girl there. And they knew the reporters were there from the Post and the News. I think there was a News at that time, 2 papers. Now there's just the Post. And I had to make a speech. Well, I told them the war wasn't over. I says, the Spanish people aren't defeated, and they'll never give up. They'll fight to the last drop of blood.
The last lesson we learned was confidence. Confidence in the ordinary working people. I told you some of the things that Tommy James was able to achieve without any of the advantages of privilege or position. We learned that in Spain. One of our best military commanders was a stonemason, Lister. Another one was called El Campesino. He was a farm worker, a brilliant general. Knew nothing about war, but because of his heart, because of his brain, proved the equivalent and as good and capable as Hitler's trained general. We've got to get the attitude of the ordinary people. Not only that we ought to run the world, but we could run it a damn sight better than the people who are running it today.
And as I say, if it were to happen again, in the circumstances, I wouldn't hesitate to go. I don't regret 1 second of the time I spent in Spain, not 1 second. In spite of all the tragedy, the suffering, the dying and the injured and all the rest of it, I wouldn't have hesitated a second. I would, in fact, there were numerous people, not my parents because they didn't know anything about it, in the party that tried to persuade me not to go. You see, I wouldn't hear of it. Wouldn't hear of it. I couldn't change my mind. I was determined to go, and I'd be equally determined again if it happened again.
Their name should be written in gold and placed on a monument for these people who, just from Leeds, who I knew of. There were other people who went from Leeds that I didn't know of. People, it should be a roll of honour set up like for Phil Ellis, George Stockdale, Cless Roach, Walter Dobson, Leon Tenner, a chap called Hardy, George Hart, Dave Buffman, Charlton. There was 3 Irish lads. I never got to know the names, but these were the people that left, well, most of them left their lives in Spain. And yet, just like a dream, nobody wants to know anything.
What the International Brigade did, and what Tommy and Chris and others did in Spain, is increasingly being seen as round one in World War II. Part of the British democratic progressive history. We're all proud of the Tolpuzzle Martyrs. We're proud of the co-op pioneers in Rochdale. We're proud of those of the Chartists. And now there's a growing understanding that the International Brigade was part of this fight for progress for the whole of the British people. And so, up and down the country, there are now 28 memorials in the big towns, smaller towns, rather all. But we've now got one bang in the centre of London to all the International Brigaders. And it's right opposite the House of Commons. And I've been told, I don't know if it's true, that one of the favourite walks of Margaret Thatcher used to be come out of the house and walk up and down and look across the river. But she doesn't do it any longer because she can see the memorial to the International Brigaders. I've also become the secretary of the International Brigade Association, which is the organisation of those of us who fought in Spain. What did we set out to do? First, when we got home from Spain, we decided the best thing we could do was give the Spanish people every help we could to get rid of Franco. And then we sent money, we sent solicitors, we sent lawyers to the trials of the people of Spain who Franco was arresting for the crime of trying to form a trade union. Well, Franco died, and then we decided that the important job that we, and there aren't many of us left alive, there are only about 120, we decided that the most important thing we could do was to show the younger people why we went to Spain, what lessons we learnt, and how, in the different problem today, they should fight, unite, and be proud of their part fighting for peace.
No bands played Colonel Bogey at their departing. No ribbon generals mouthed speeches about honour. Troop train threading the night toward the death line carried no exaltation of remembered pride and weeping. No headlines raved about the manner of their dying. No flower petals fell from slim, fair fingers on the few who came back limping, torn or blinded. No cathedral praised them with sad chanting. They had no country but the hope of a new country. They answered the secret radio in their hearts, from the factories, fields and workshops of all nations, from the millions shackled by greed, made less than human. So they fought and died for their grave, proud duty, without the fawning praise of kings and prelates, were digged into the red footings of the future and will be remembered in the songs of a new freedom. International Brigade.
In 1935, the Labour and Social History Panel, which is a subcommittee of the Labour and of the Library and Arts Committee of the Council, began to discuss what to do to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Spanish War. And what emerged was this. First of all, it was agreed to have some memorial, permanent memorial, in the Peace Gardens just outside the town hall. And that was eventually done, and the plaque is there, and that was opened in, I think it was September of 1936. Secondly, it was agreed that they would have a booklet on aid to Spain, and the Holdry Society produced this behind the clenched fist. That is, all the help that was given in Sheffield to those who were actually fighting in Spain. Then there was a program of events.
Spain in the 30s saved peace, saved democracy. Today, the problem is stop nuclear war, how to improve the conditions of the ordinary people. And so I'm quite confident that the young people, there's no need for them to take arms in Nicaragua. the people there can do it themselves. But what we need here in our country, Britain today, is the same movement of solidarity, practical help to the people of Nicaragua, El Salvador, or anywhere in the world in the fight for peace, human freedom and dignity.
In the context of Nicaragua, if you look at Spain, the things have a similarity, but of course we're 40 odd years on, and this is America and not the European continent, and it will be very difficult. It is difficult, although having said that, it doesn't mean that there isn't things happening in England organised by different groups of people to assist the Nicaraguan people. We know that, but a huge organised campaign on the scale that took place in Spain is another kettle of fish. It can't just come from the grassroots. It's got to be organised by the labour movement, the trade unions, in order to see to it that the campaign is as effective as the one in Spain. Now, when you see that, when you remember that the Trade Union Congress in the Spain conflict, the Spanish conflict, the International Brigade was called the Attlee Brigade. That was the leader of the labour movement. It was called the Attlee Brigade because the labour movement was involved in it. Jack Jones and many other prominent trade unionists were also involved in the International Brigade and in the Food for Spain campaigns. And they were able to at least put some pressures on, although many of the right-wing labour leaders in the trade union movement and inside the Labour Party drew back from any real involvement, although they had to be involved. Even Attlee went to see the International Brigade in Spain, which showed that the labour movement was involved at the top as a result of pressure that came from below. But you've also got to start it from the top as well, and we're not getting it at the moment as far as Nicaragua is concerned.
If you are thinking about an international brigade in Nicaragua, I don't think we could do it. There just isn't the confidence in the progress towards a new society that there was 50 years ago.
What are the lessons? What have we learned from the fight in Spain? What can you learn from the life of Tommy James and the others like him? The first thing is, if you don't fight, you can never win. If you don't start fighting, you can never achieve victory. But if you sit back and say, am I going to win? Will I, won't I? I'll put the fight off to another day. Then you will never achieve victory. And this was a slogan advanced by another ordinary woman, one of the Spanish leaders, a miner's wife, called Passionera. And she said, it is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. We're not in that sort of struggle. But unless we begin the fight now, unless we say we don't care what parliamentary majority the Tories have got, we're going to campaign as you did in Rotherham against the cuts in the health service. You're going to protest when they try to sack jobs. We're going to stop fighting. Unless you start on the campaigns which face the British people, you will never, ever win.